Our gospel lesson comes from John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. John chapter 20, beginning with that first verse, we read, "Early in the morning of the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, 'They've taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they put him.' Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter, and he was the first to arrive at the tomb. And bending down to look, he saw the linen clothes lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying there, and he also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other clothes, but was folded up in its own place. Then the other disciple, the one whom arrived at the tomb first, went inside. He saw and he believed, but they didn't yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Mary stood outside near the tomb crying. And as she cried, she bent down and looked into the tomb. She saw two angels dressed in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?' She replied, 'They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they put him.' And as soon as she said this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, 'Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?' Thinking he was the gardener, she replied, 'Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him.' And Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' And she turned and said to him in Aramaic, 'Rabboni,' which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, 'Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. But go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father, who will be your Father. And I'm going to my God, who will be your God.' And Mary Magdalene left, and she announced to the disciples, 'I've seen the Lord.' And then she told them all that he said." The word of the Lord. In sharing with you this scripture passage from John chapter 20, I got to tell you, for me as a minister, it's a little bit daunting. It's Easter Sunday, and I know you want a good message, but I've got so much scripture here, I'm not quite sure what in the world I'm supposed to preach. There's all kinds of sermons in these 18 verses of scripture. Our options are many. But I've written down a few of the options that you might discover from this same passage in John chapter 20. For example, in verses 1 and 2, there's a message. The scripture says, early in the morning, it was still dark. They came to the tomb. They asked, who had taken the Lord from the tomb? Oh, I've got the title for this Easter message. It's a good one. You might want to write it down. If not, throw it back in your jogging and bring it up later at home. Here's the story. Are you ready for it? A good Easter message. Don't be negative in life. There could be more to the story. Give me just a little reaction. I mean, that one would work. How about verses 3 and 4? There's a message here as well. The disciples left to go to the tomb. They ran faster than Peter and the first to arrive. I really kind of like this one. And that is this. The message would be, arriving first is not the goal of Christianity. Oh, so many times in our life we just get where we want to be first. We want to get there. But it's not our goal. That'd be a good Easter message. In verses 5, 6, 7, and 8, we discover these words. Bending down, they saw the linen cloths lying. They saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. They didn't yet understand. And the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Here's an Easter message. Confusion is often a part of life, but Jesus is not the author of confusion. 1 Corinthians 4:33. That one will work. In verses 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, we find these words. Mary stood outside crying. The angels asked, "Why are you crying?" Then she turned around and saw Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Why are you crying?" If I preach from this one, it's got to be the difference between tears of sorrow and tears of joy. Because there's a difference. And then looking at the last three verses of Scripture, hear them again. Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," meaning teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. I go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And verse 18. Mary Magdalene left, and she announced to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." And then she told them what he'd said to her. Well, there's my message. I've seen the Lord. It's a good Easter message. I think it's going to work because Jesus is alive. And while it may seem impossible with our eye to think we will see him, the truth is you can see him today. Have you seen Jesus? This is the Scripture. Jesus was known and referred to, and in our scriptures we've read this morning, we hear the word Jesus of Nazareth. Why? Because of his association with Nazareth. It was his place, in a way his home. Verse 18 says it was Mary Magdalene. Who is Mary Magdalene? Where'd she come from? What is her story? Who is it? And why is it that God's going to select her to be the first person to see him after the resurrection? Well, there are multiple references to Mary's in the Bible. And when you read the story of the crucifixion, you're going to read of three. It's going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now, these three women have dotted the entire landscape of Jesus' life. Everywhere he went, they were there. Everywhere he was preaching, they were there. Whatever city he was traveling to, they were going. When Jesus called the disciples, those fishermen, and said, I want to make you fishers of men, these ladies were there. Mary Magdalene, most uniquely, was a very early follower of Jesus. And if you're wondering what's her story, how does she become a follower of Jesus? Which I think is a good question to ask. I've even asked many of you, why are you following? What is your story? How is it that you and Jesus got together? I want to know the details because they tell us the things about you. Well, here's Mary Magdalene and her encounter with Jesus. The story we discover in Luke chapter 8. She was demon possessed. She had 7 demons in her. And when she had the encounter with Jesus, he cast all 7 demons out of her. And she immediately became a follower of him. Scripture tells us she was a lady of possessions. She was a lady of great wealth. Mary, the wife of Cleopas, was also a lady of great wealth. Have you ever wondered in the Bible why Jesus never took up an offering? Have you ever wondered in the Bible why the disciples never raised any funds? It's because there were these women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who met the needs of the disciples. They raised the funds. They provided what they needed so they could go, so they could travel. Oh, imagine this Mary Magdalene, who had been demon possessed, who has these demons cast out, and she follows him, totally committed to him after that. And what she has, matter of fact, all that she has, she gives to the cause of Christ. Mary Magdalene was not only at all those places that I just mentioned, but Scripture supports their presence and their following in every aspect. And more especially when we get to the crucifixion. Mary Magdalene was there before Herod. She was there in the presence when Jesus was before Pilate. Mary Magdalene was there as they tortured him and beat him before the trial. Mary Magdalene watched from afar, trying to get as close and to give as much aid as she could, but no way for them to get to Jesus. He's been arrested. She was there when he walked that Via Dolorosa. At each of the stations, when Jesus fell and Simon the centurion was compelled to bear the cross, she was there. When he was in agony on the cross and they pierced his side and they gave him vinegar mangled in gall to drink, she was there. And when he cried, she was there. And when he died, she was there. Having said that, let me remind you again of this verse of Scripture I've selected for our text. It was dark and early in the morning when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. Why? Her devotion to Jesus was not done. Hastily being put into the tomb, the body of Jesus still needed preparation. And so she makes her way. And when she gets to the tomb and she discovers that it's empty,